friend, a partner, maybe a boss, and they haven't yelled, they haven't thrown a plate, they're just talking. But your heart rate is clocking in at 110 beats per minute. Your palms are sweating, your stomach is in knots, you feel like you've just run a sprint, but you haven't moved an inch.
Your body is screaming predator, even if your brain is trying to say dinner conversation.
Exactly. We tend to think of difficult relationships as emotional problems, drama, baggage. But what if I told you that being around certain people is arguably a biological hazard? That the cells in your body actually change how they express DNA when you're consistently around someone who devalues you?
It's not a metaphor, Noah. It is physiological. There is a mechanism called the conserved transcriptional response to adversity, or CTR. When we feel socially threatened or isolated by toxic dynamics, our bodies literally switch on genes that promote inflammation and switch off genes that fight viruses. We are quite literally poisoning ourselves to survive the social environment.
That is terrifying, but it sets the stakes perfectly for today. We are not just talking about drama. We are talking about health, longevity, and the neuroscience of survival. I'm Noah, and this is Breaking Free.
I'm Eloise, and today we are dissecting the buzzword of the decade, toxicity, how to identify it, the history of where that label comes from, and most importantly, the science of how to actually get away from it.
Let's start with that word. Toxic. It is everywhere. Your boss is toxic because he emailed you at 6 p.m. Your ex is toxic because they didn't like your Instagram post. It feels like the word has lost all meaning. Is this actually a clinical term, or are we just slapping a hazard symbol on anyone who annoys us?
It is absolutely not a clinical diagnosis. You will not find toxic person in the DSM-5. It is purely pop psychology. In fact, if we trace the genealogy of the term, it really exploded into the mainstream with Lillian Glass's book, Toxic People, back in 1995. She used it as a catch-all for anyone who made your life miserable. But the danger, as you pointed out, is that when you label everyone toxic, you stop looking at the specific behaviors. Is this person a narcissist? Are they chemically dependent? Or are they just rude? Those require different strategies.
Right. If I call my engine broken, that doesn't tell a mechanic how to fix it. But there is another term that often gets paired with toxicity, one that actually has a very specific, almost cinematic origin: gaslighting. I feel like that word had a massive spike around 2016, right?
It did, and the origin is fascinating because it's literal. It comes from a 1938 play called Gaslight by Patrick Hamilton. In the story, a husband is secretly dimming the gas-powered lights in their home while searching for hidden jewels in the attic. When his wife notices the lights dimming, he insists she's imagining it. He manipulates her environment to make her question her own sanity. That is the core definition. Not just lying, but dismantling someone's perception of reality.
Which is distinct from just being a jerk. Being a jerk is, I don't care about your feelings. Gaslighting is, your feelings are based on events that never happened. But let's go back to the physical cost you mentioned in the open. You mentioned inflammation. Is there hard data on what staying in these relationships actually does to us long-term, beyond just feeling stressed?
The data is startling. Look at the Whitehall 2 study, which is this massive longitudinal study of over 10,000 people. They found a direct link between negative close relationships and coronary heart disease. People in these high conflict dynamics had a significantly higher risk of fatal heart events. And it makes sense if you look at the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
The stress highway.
Precisely. In a healthy stress response, you see a bear, cortisol spikes, you run, you survive, cortisol drops. In a toxic relationship, the bear is sleeping in your bed or sitting in the cubicle next to you. The cortisol never drops. You are marinating in stress hormones. This shrinks the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning, and enlarges the amygdala, the fear center, so you effectively become dumber and more scared.
That explains why people in these situations often describe feeling foggy or unable to make decisions. It's not a character flaw. Their prefrontal cortex is literally being taken offline by their amygdala.
Yes, and that brain change is a huge part of why leaving is so hard. We need to talk about the trauma bond. This is a concept Dr. Ramani Durvasula talks about extensively. She's one of the leading voices on narcissism today. She explains that these relationships operate like a slot machine.
Intermittent reinforcement.
Exactly. If a slot machine never paid out, you'd walk away. If it always paid out, you'd get bored. But if it pays out randomly, a moment of kindness, a great date night, a sudden compliment after weeks of criticism, your brain floods with dopamine. You become addicted not to the person, but to the cycle. You are chasing the win. That is why telling someone just leave is like telling a heroin addict to just stop.
That reframing is crucial. It shifts the narrative from "why are you so weak" to "you are fighting a chemical dependency." But let's pivot to practical. We know it's bad. We know why it's hard to leave. How do we actually do it? Especially if we can't just ghost them, say if it's a co-parent or a boss.
This is where we have to talk about boundaries, but not in the way people usually think. Nedra Glover-Tawwab, a therapist who wrote Set Boundaries, Find Peace, makes this brilliant distinction between porous and rigid boundaries. Most people in toxic dynamics have porous boundaries. They let everything in. They over-explain. They apologize for existing. The reaction, when they finally snap, is to go rigid. I am never talking to you again.
And usually that rigid boundary collapses because it's unsustainable, right? You can't just never speak to your boss again if you want to keep your job.
Right, so the strategy is the Goldilocks zone, or more tactically, a technique called the gray rock method. Have you heard of this?
I have, but I think a lot of people misunderstand it as just giving the silent treatment. What is it really?
It's not silence. Silence is a reaction. Silence says, I am angry. Gray rock means you become as uninteresting as a rock. You offer no supply. If a toxic person tries to bait you with an insult, instead of defending yourself, you say, interesting perspective. If they try to create a crisis, you say, that sounds stressful. I'm sure you'll handle it. You are denying them the emotional fuel they feed on. It originated from a blogger named Skylar back in 2012. Again, not clinical research, but a strategy developed by survivors.
But there's a trap here, isn't there? I've read that when you start gray rocking, things often get worse before they get better. It's called an extinction burst in behavioral psychology.
Yes, and that is a critical warning. If you stop feeding the slot machine, the player doesn't just walk away immediately. They shake the machine, they kick it. If you change the dynamic, the toxic person will likely escalate their behavior to get the old reaction back. They might spread rumors, create a massive emergency, or become suddenly incredibly charming. That's called hoovering, like the vacuum. If you break Grey Rock during that escalation, you have just taught them that they need to scream louder to get a reaction.
So consistency is the only way it works. Let's look at this through an economic lens for a second. We've talked about personal relationships, but workplace toxicity is a massive issue. I was looking at some numbers. Toxic workplaces are estimated to cost U.S. employers something like $900 billion a year.
It is astronomical, and the breakdown of that cost is fascinating. It's not just lawsuits, it's turnover. Research from MIT Sloan found that a toxic corporate culture is 10 times more predictive of attrition than compensation. People will take a pay cut to leave a toxic environment. And think about the cognitive tax. If you spend 20% of your mental energy anticipating your boss's mood swings, that is 20% of your brain power not doing your job.
It's an inefficiency tax. So if we're in the situation, whether it's a boss or a partner, and we are trying to leave or set boundaries, we have to deal with the guilt, the "am I the bad guy" feeling. Because toxic people are often master manipulators. They flip the script. How do you hold on to reality?
Documentation. This sounds clinical, but it saves lives. Keep a journal. Not a dear diary of your feelings, but a factual log of events. Tuesday, 2 p.m., he said X. Wednesday, 9 a.m., he denied saying X. When the gaslighting starts, when they say, I never said that, you're crazy, you have a data set. You don't even have to show it to them. In fact, you shouldn't. It's for you. It's to anchor your own reality against the distortion field.
I like that. It's treating your life like a scientific study. But I want to play devil's advocate for a moment. Is there a danger that we are becoming too quick to cut people off? We see these TikTok trends of going no contact, and it's framed as this ultimate act of self-care. But relationships are messy. People are flawed. Are we losing the ability to forgive or work through conflict because we just label it toxic and bail?
That is the central tension of our time, Noah. We are losing the distinction between uncomfortable and unsafe. Conflict is healthy. Disagreement is necessary. Even anger is a valid emotion. Toxicity is different because it is characterized by a lack of empathy and a refusal to take responsibility. If you tell a friend, "Hey, it hurt me when you were late," and they say, "I'm so sorry, I messed up," that is a healthy mess. If they say, "You're always so sensitive, I was only 5 minutes late, why are you ruining the night?" that is toxicity. The marker isn't the mistake, it's the reaction to the accountability.
That's a brilliant distinction. The marker is the reaction to accountability. I want to circle back to the hope aspect, because we started with the terrifying idea that our DNA is changing. If we get out, if we move on, does the damage reverse, or are we permanently broken?
The brain is incredibly resilient. We used to think the brain stopped developing in our 20s, but we now know about neuroplasticity. We can rewire. Studies on survivors of emotional abuse show that with safe environments and practices like mindfulness or CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, the amygdala can shrink back to normal size. The hippocampus can regrow density. You can literally heal the hardware of your brain.
So the brain fog isn't a life sentence.
Not at all, but it requires what Dr. Ramani calls radical acceptance. You have to accept that the toxic person will likely never change. You have to give up the hope of a different past. Once you stop trying to explain yourself to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you, you free up all that energy to heal yourself.
Radical acceptance. It sounds passive, but it's actually the most active thing you can do. It's dropping the rope in a tug of war.
And walking out of the muddy pit. And the interesting thing is, when you do that, when you heal, you often find that you become boring to toxic people in the future. You don't have that hook anymore. You recognize the red flags not as excitement or passion, but as danger. Your picker gets fixed.
I want to ask about the aftermath. Let's say someone listening has just left. They've done the hard part. But now they're sitting in a quiet apartment, maybe feeling lonely, maybe missing the chaos. What is the immediate survival guide for those first few months?
You have to expect the withdrawal. Remember the dopamine addiction we talked about? You will physically crave the intensity. Peace will feel boring. It might even feel like depression. You have to retrain your nervous system to tolerate safety. It sounds strange, but if you've been running from a bear for 5 years, sitting on a park bench feels wrong. You're waiting for the bear. You have to consciously engage in glimmers, small moments of safety, a warm cup of coffee, a walk where no one yells at you. You are teaching your body, we are safe now. You can stand down.
Retraining the nervous system to tolerate safety. That is profound. It challenges the idea that happily ever after is immediate relief. Sometimes it's just quiet.
And quiet is where the healing happens. It's where the inflammation goes down. It's where the CTRA gene expression flips back to health mode. It is not immediate, but it is inevitable if you stay the course.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on one last controversial point, the idea of generational toxicity. We often learn these patterns from our parents. If you grew up in a house where gaslighting was the primary language, how do you ensure you don't become the toxic person yourself?
That is the work. That is the cycle breaking. It starts with self-awareness. If you find yourself needing to control situations, or if you feel a flash of rage when someone sets a boundary with you, pause. Ask yourself, is this me or is this a script I learned? Therapy is crucial here, but also just the willingness to ask, am I the problem, usually indicates you aren't the narcissist. Narcissists rarely ask that question.
That's a relief for many listeners, I'm sure. The worry that you are the monster is often proof that you're not.
Precisely. Toxic people protect their ego at all costs. Healthy people, or people trying to be healthy, protect the relationship and their integrity. The fact that you are worried about your impact on others is a sign of empathy, which is the antidote to toxicity.
So, to recap for everyone listening, toxicity isn't just a mood killer, it's a biological stressor that alters your brain and heart. The term is pop psych, but the impact is clinical. The way out involves understanding the addiction of the trauma bond, using tools like the gray rock method to break the cycle, and accepting that peace might feel boring at first.
And remembering that your body is on your side. That anxiety, that pit in your stomach, that isn't weakness. That is your body's intelligence trying to save you. Listen to it.
Eloise, this has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you for stripping away the buzzwords and giving us the mechanics of this.
Thank you for having me. It's a life-saving conversation.
For everyone listening, if you're sitting across from that person at dinner tonight and your heart is racing, maybe it's time to trust your heart. Not in the romantic way, but in the survival way. We'll see you next time.